Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at a Wuthering Waves character tier list. Now, I know in general, before the actual character is released, there was a lot of people that had a character tier list before during the beta section, but I do want to go through most of these characters, and I'm going to drop out a few characters like Yinlin, and I'm going to just put these guys at the end. I'm also going to put the female version of the Rover. There is no difference between these characters in general. And I'm also going to put the no element versions of the rovers at the bottom as well. And we'll just not touch these characters because I already go over each of the rovers. And there's no difference between the male and female version. I just chose the male version, so I'll just use that. If you chose a female version, you can easily just swap that in instead. Jumping over into the first few characters that you get in the game with the Spectro Rover. Now, personally, with him, I'm going to throw him in C tier. Now, his damage is nice. He's got a nice big hit burst, and I think that's also nice, but I think the difference comes in with changing out the different characters that we're going to have and why this kind of works in this tier list. Now, this tier list is a little bit more focused on how, in general, the character can be useful to the team. This isn't necessarily just focusing on damage or usability in, just one instance of the team. Even if they're a healer, how well do they do that job, as well as how can they fit in a team, and are they a good, choice to go into a team? Because at this point in time, we only have 3 characters in each team in Wuthering Waves, which means that each character has to have a higher usability instead of just only being a healer or just being this one thing, like in some other games that have 4 characters, which allows us an extra slot to be a little bit more flexible with to just do one thing. And so that's why I say that, at least for here, I'm going to put the Rover at this here. He doesn't have anything crazy that's a good grouping ability, or he doesn't have a ton of AoE. He's got a nice burst hit, and that's, or an ultimate hit, and that's kind of nice and whatnot. But I would kind of jump over into kind of, he does good damage, and that's why I think he sits at the C tier for me, at least. And specifically, I'm just going to jump from the characters that we kind of got at the beginning of the game, is Yang Yang. Yang Yang is a great character, and personally, I'm going to put her in the B tier. Now, I'm personally not a fan of using her too much, but at the beginning of the game, when I actually kind of had to, I really liked her AoE capability in her burst, as well as the amount of damage she could do with her skill and her intro skill, as well as just entirely her kit. She could basically do as much damage as my Rover while he was on field, and that was extremely nice to see out of a 4-star at the beginning of the game. Going beyond that into a character named Chixia, sadly, I'm just going to have to throw her in the D tier. Now, it's not only just because, she's a pistol user or whatever. It's not any of that. The reason I'm going to put her down here is that she doesn't do a lot of damage, and that's kind of the main reason for her kind of being, one of the characters on the team. Once again, like I said, they have to, be used multiple different ways and be a lot more versatile in this game. And for me personally, she didn't really hit any of the marks. She doesn't do a great amount of damage. She doesn't have a great ability that can do anything. She doesn't heal. She doesn't shield. So a lot of these things, just coming low on every single one of the marks. And so sadly, I just had to throw her at the bottom in the D tier rank. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that she's a useless character and you can't use her. I'm just going to throw her at the bottom of the ranks because I'm not really going to be using her for really most of my teams, if ever. It's kind of like a character like Amber in Genshin. She's could be a good character, and she's going to be nice to have at the beginning of the game to kind of get you through the beginning stuff. But once you're done with that, you're probably never going to touch her again and, build her or put weapons on her or whatnot later on, unless you really like her as a character. The next character that you could get at the beginning of the game, you start with these 3 characters, but the game does kind of quote unquote force you to pull for the first bit to show you how to convene, and you'll automatically, no matter what, get a Baizhi. Now, I know some people like Rift, one of my friends, did not actually do this pull just because he wanted to save his stuff as much as possible, and now he doesn't have a healer on his account, so he has to go for Verena. Now, for me, on the other hand, I actually did the pull, and I do have Baizhi, and for people that don't want to grab the Verena, or they want to be a little bit more secured with extra healing, I think Baizhi is a great character, so she's going to be slotted in at the B tier. I don't think that necessarily she does anything extremely goated and pops off and does, all these different great things that I would maybe put in the S tier. And A tier, I'm going to show some other characters I think that just do a little bit better in terms of what she can do. But I think in general, if you don't have Verena, even if you do, I'm going to be building my Baizhi either way because I want to have both a team for one side and another side. So if I maybe try to do the Tower of Adversity and have 2 different teams, or if I run out of energy on one of my characters like Verena to, I don't have a healer anymore, maybe once you get to the later levels, Maybe I could use Baizha at the lower levels, so she's not as cracked of a healer as Verena, but I can maybe use Verena at the higher end. So I think building both of these characters, if you have them, is a great idea, and especially if you only have Baizha, heavily suggest building her as well. Beyond that, looking at some other 4 stars that we could get, Tao Chi is another character, and the rest of these characters are going to be kind of, Sanhua you can get through, all these characters you can get through wishing, but Sanhua and Yuan Wu are going to be characters that you can get through other means. Yuan Wu is a character that you can get through the Tower of Adversity by going through the first zone and clearing all 4 floors that are there. So actually, I'm just going to immediately jump over to him, and I'm just going to slot him in D tier as well. He focuses off of defense percent, which isn't necessarily terrible, but the problem I think that comes in is that he does some off-field damage, and that's nice. But the problem that I think I have with him is that it's not crazy stellar amount of damage. Once again, like I said, you need to do a lot of damage. You need to do one thing. You can't just do one thing. And I think having that field there with not a lot of damage, it's very similar to how I felt with Chixia. Your one job you weren't even good at, so why are you even on my team right now? You know what I mean? So I kind of just keep them, lower on my end, at least for this tier list. And hopefully maybe in the future we'll be able to see some things that can pop them up higher. Like I said, another character that you can get for free by just logging in for 5 days in a row is Sanhua. Sanhua, personally, I think fits on the same line as either B or C tier. Kind of looking at both of these characters, it's a little different because I think Sanhua does as much damage and can be very good for a team as Yang Yang and Baizha. But at the same time, I think in general, she was about as useful as my Spectro Rover. So I think I'm going to throw her in C tier. But once again, that does not necessarily say that you shouldn't build her. It's just that I think in general for this tier list, she's not quote unquote as useful as some of these other characters that you can kind of focus on to build. Alto is another character I'm going to throw in C tier. He does have arrow, so he can have some, maybe some pulling abilities and whatnot. But I do think that him as a character is not going to be crazy good for an account. I think he's fun. I think he's got some good kid abilities, and I think he's a fun character to listen to. He's kind of funny, kind of like Ito from Genshin or something like that. But I think beyond that, there's not really anything crazy that he can really bring to a 3-man team. Tao Chi is the next character I want to bring up, and Tao Chi is an interesting one because I want to throw her in the B tier and possibly even the A tier just because of the amount of damage that she can output. In the story, we are actually given a Tao Chi, and she does a lot of damage, and she's extremely fun to use and really gives across that idea of a broad blade user. Now, beyond that though, when I tried to build her myself personally, it wasn't the exact same that we kind of got in the trial version of her in the story. And so personally for me, I'm just going to put her back down to the B tier. I think she's just as useful as Yang Yang and Baizha, which is great. And if you have her, build her and maybe even try to use her as your main damage dealer. Now, looking at some other 4-star characters like Mortefi and Danjin. I'm going to throw both these characters into the A tier, not only from what I've heard, but I personally just running them in their trials in the actual event page that we have where you can run the trial of the character. I've loved Mortefi as a character and just what he can do. And obviously, I think that, just as Tao Chi is a great, DPS character, I think Danjin is the exact same way. Both these characters are going to do lots of damage. I just felt a little bit more comfortable using Danjin than I did with Tao Chi. Mortefi, on the other hand, is just a great character in general. Probably, in my opinion, one of the best 4-stars that you could have on an account. So if you were lucky enough to pull on the Gion banner, or in general just get him by accident, I think he's going to be one of the best things, that's probably one of the best things that could happen for your account. Going over, before we get to the other 5-stars, looking at the 5-star Havoc version of the Rover. I'm going to slap him into the B tier. Similar to why I kind of have him a little bit lower on the Spectro side of things, I think he's middle of the pack. He does good damage, and I like the Havoc version more than I like the Spectro version of the Rover, but at least in terms of a 5-star, compared to these others in terms of a damage dealer and whatnot, it seems like he didn't hit all the marks, but he does have a good amount of damage, and he does have a good amount of, a little bit of AoE damage capabilities with some of the abilities that he can use being a Havoc character. So I do think that he perfectly slots into the B tier, if not even, can kind of push up sometimes into the A tier, depending on what your account looks like. Looking at some other characters, I have to throw Shangxin, or however you're going to say her name, right at S tier. Having a shield as a character, not having to worry about having a shielder, allows you to have 2 other characters in your team that are going to be damage characters, just because you can pop up a shield. And I think that's going to be extremely useful for any account and any team that you put her in, which allows you to have your healer or one of these other healers into a different side. Maybe if you're doing the Tower of Adversity already, having two different, shielders and a healer, something like that is going to be extremely great to have on one side and the other. Ling Yang kind of has a great thing. Now, I really, really love his entire gameplay. I love using his echo skill to jump around, and using him as a character was extremely fun when we got to do his story quest. But in general, I think compared to these other 5-star characters, I think he just falls a little bit short. I do love him as a character, and I do think that he does a good amount of damage. And if you have him and he's your only 5-star, if he dropped by accident, I think heavily, heavily build him. Go ahead and just go invest to him and try to, just run along as far as you can with him in the game. I think he'll be able to pull you pretty far in the game as well. He's going to be just as good, if not a little bit better than some of these other characters in the A tier. And like I said before, Mortefi and Danjin are amazing 4-stars. So even though he is in the A tier, not the S tier, he's still a great character that you should build. Calcharo, now I don't know if this is necessarily just my personal opinion as well, but from what I've seen in gameplay and from what I believe in looking at his kit, I'm going to have to throw him into the S tier. He's a great damage dealer and does so much just raw damage that your other characters don't have to worry too much about a lot of other things that are happening, whenever you come across something. And I think in general, he's one of those characters that you can just keep on field and just kill something extremely fast and then go to the next character. Encore is another character I'm going to throw up in the S tier, and it's, once again, she has a good amount of damage, but I do think the other thing that kind of puts her up in the S tier and kind of separates her from maybe someone like Ling Yang is that Encore has the ability to use her 2 dolls to do a bunch of damage and use her skill, and then at that point, while you're doing that damage, you could switch off to a different character, like I do with Jian, and Encore is going to be finishing doing her damage hits as you're already fighting with a different character like Jian and getting him already going for his, entire setup. And so it's extra quote-unquote off-field damage that I was pretty much a fan of ever since I got her. Verena, I'm going to jump to next, and I'll keep Jian for the end. I'm going to put Verena at the top, and the reason why is because she's such a great healer, not only just jumping off and doing, obviously, with her burst, very similar to Baizha, but if you do like heavy attacks and plunging attacks or mid-air attacks, then you have the ability to actually heal your characters with those attacks if you have a certain amount of photosynthesis marks, which are pretty easy to get as well. So don't really worry too much about getting those. It'll kind of come pretty easily. So I do think that she's just a better version, basically a 5-star version of Baizha. The last character we'll talk about is Jian. Obviously, I'm going to throw him in the S tier. He might move down if we have Yinlin and kind of looking at the 2 different event characters and kind of where that looks at. But he's got great AoE ability. Because he's an arrow character, he has his dragon swirling around. If there's multiple enemies nearby, you're hitting so many different things all at once. You're not just hitting one thing one time, kind of like an Encore skill is hitting one enemy. If you have him popping his ult, he's just going to be hitting multiple things all at once. And I think that is extremely useful. And as well, he's an extremely good juggler. It's very easy to juggle just a lot of enemies in the game so that they can't constantly attack you. And so lower enemies or things that can get, that aren't heavy enemies can get basically just tossed around for fun by him. Well, that's everything I've got in this video. I do want to kind of do some more Wuthering Waves content, as well as looking into Genshin and Star Rail, looking at my ideas of kind of some other characters and talking about that type of stuff. So if you guys do want to see some future stuff about me talking about that, or even doing some YouTube streams like I'd like to do in the future, go ahead and like and subscribe so you guys are notified, as well with the notification bell. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.